Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. So we got to discuss this. Jim Cornette had a response for the sign. They got the guy thrown out of the AEW show. The sign at Nyla Rose. People didn't like his reaction. They didn't like it. I'm not surprised he had the reaction that he had, considering kind of the business, man. Look, the business is all about people trying to offend the wrestlers personally. Now, over the last couple of weeks, there has been some really cringe stuff occurring. The gay dude in the Acclaimed, Anthony Bowens, claims that people were yelling the FAG word at him. He got upset and even going on a week-long tour talking about it. And now this sign pops up at AEW that Nyla Rose is some guy's dad. This brings us to the history of fans being offensive. And what do we do about fans being offensive? I mean, we've seen numerous times where fans have gotten out of line. A fan a couple of years ago told Io Shirai to go back to China. Some of the fans, there was a Ring of Honor show. Nobody talks about this, where the enlightened liberal wrestling fans of New York City were chanting "Let's go Goku" at Hiroshi Tanahashi. Which, of course, what makes him Goku from Dragon Ball, except the fact that he's from Japan. And, there that goes. So what is the line? I mean, our Ring of Honor didn't throw anybody out for chanting "Let's go Goku." It is what it is. Sometimes the fans are, let's say, antagonized into that kind of reaction, which is the point. Sometimes that brings us to the Goldust question. That Goldust used to get a lot of the weird signs too. He used to get a lot of hatred, but a lot of that was by design. They wanted you to dislike the character and to scream and yell and be quote unquote homophobic at the character. Muhammad Hassan was another one. They kind of asked for it in terms of how they portrayed the character. Sometimes the character is begging for that kind of reaction. Now, the Nyla Rose situation is a little bit different, considering Nyla Rose is, I hate to put it in the way that they want me to put it, but Nyla Rose is just a person living the way that they want to live. And anyone who comes along and says negative things about that is a negative phobe, racist, blah, 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 right? So that's different. As somebody put in the on Twitter, it's person versus persona. And I like that difference, because the persona is Nyla Rose, but that's also the person. It's not like this person takes off all that makeup, takes off that wig, and takes off that dress when they go to the back, right? That person wears all that stuff all the time. So, in offending the persona, you're also offending the person. In some ways, that's what Cornette wants. Cornette doesn't want people to be gimmicks. He wants them to be themselves. Nyla Rose is being themselves. And in being yourself, you attract this kind of reaction. What should occur? And that's really the question we have today. AEW has a code of conduct that they have before every show. Is pretty much, we've seen it displayed on screen every once in a while. They've asked people not to use certain language, even though they continue to let the fans curse and they continue to let the wrestlers curse. And there is just a limitation on what you can and cannot do. Hurting people's feelings seems to be in that bracket of things that you cannot, should not, shall not get away with. Now, I will say this. I know a lot of people are going to be, but AEW is well within their rights to throw the guy out. If they're going to throw the guy out of the building, they're well within their rights to do so. People have been kicked out of buildings for less. Okay, people have been kicked out of buildings for less than that. The guy got on a hard cam with a really stiff sign for Nyla Rose, it is what it is. I was actually criticized for my response for it. So I understand what Jim Cornette thinks. My response was, and if you didn't listen to that whole video, it was the guy was making a joke. And I understand the person versus persona thing. But the guy was making a joke and calling a thing what it is. Right? It was a very roundabout way of calling Nyla Rose a man. Right? You have to understand the concept of A equals A. A thing can only be what it is. And I know that sometimes people get into their subjective realities where they can have different things, have different meanings, and yada, yada, yada. I know that. But in reality, A equals A, right? A tree, no matter what you do to it, you can chop it up. We call it paper once we've, manipulated it enough and reformed it and did all that stuff. But we know trees are made of paper, paper are made of trees. I had to get that the other way around. We know that hamburger ground up cows. We know that. It's sure we call it a different thing as it undergoes a process. And we can say the same thing about human beings. We can call a human being another thing after it undergoes a process. But we have to understand that that human being is what it was, okay? A hamburger is still a cow, Chicken wings, still part of a chicken, okay? So it undergoes the process of being alive and clucking and everything, and then you take it through this lengthy process of slaughtering and cleaning and deep frying and all that stuff before it becomes the chicken wing on your plate. But we know what it is, right? When I said that this guy was calling a thing what it is, that's what I'm saying. We know that Nyla Rose is trying to undergo a process to go from one thing to another. But what we're saying is that thing is still that thing. Okay? We'll get to Jim Cornette in a second. I just want to explain my position because I'm tired of getting emails about this and people trying to flag my channel. This is the thing. It is a thing. It's A. A equals A. A will always be A. We can be nice and call it C if that's what you would prefer. All right? But A will always equal A. 1 equals 1. Right? It is what it is. That's all people are saying when it comes to Nyla Rose. Nobody's trying to be mean. Nobody's trying to be transphobic and hurt the person's feelings. We're saying a thing is what it is. And that's all that it is. From that point forward, take it how you want to take it. Okay. So now that I've gotten that lengthy preamble out of the way, it's been almost 10 minutes. This is what Jim Cornette had to say about the Nyla Rose sign. And this is going to take us to the second part of our video. Boy, times have changed. When wrestling drew big crowds, fans got tossed out if they committed physical assault or pulled out a knife. If you tossed them for saying horrible things and hurting the wrestlers' feelings, the buildings would have been empty, like they are now. And he's not wrong. He is not wrong. You can read the lips of some fans in some of those old arenas until they were calling wrestlers sissies all the time. That was one of the biggest ones, was the FAG and calling wrestlers sissies, or calling them pussies. That stuff happens all the time. Today, they would call that sexist language and homophobic language. That wasn't the case back then. Nobody cared. All right. So now we're just supposed to call them doodle heads, call them nothing, say nothing, do nothing. Because again, what we're talking about here is people's feelings being hurt. People being upset that you yelled at them, that you yelled something at them. And the point of yelling something at somebody is to upset them. It is to get a reaction out of them. You're being worked by the audience. Now, to Nyla Rose's credit, Nyla Rose was not worked by that audience member. Nyla Rose flipped that audience member off, continued doing the thing, continued staying in character, preparing for the match. Smart. Gotta give Nyla Rose credit for that. Probably been dealing with this for a long time. Just deal with it, you know. Take Io Shirai. The guy said go back to China. She said I'm from Japan, bitch. Get back in the ring. Goes on about her day. You know, we don't have to stop the show and get worked by the audience, because that's what the audience is trying to do. Now that the audience feels like they're a part of the show, the audience is going to try to work you. And every time, what ends up happening is the audience ends up working itself. Now, everybody who sits out in the crowd is going to be upset about this guy putting up this sign. Is going to be looking for other people. They're going to be policing each other. The fans are going to spend more time policing each other about offensive signs and offensive shirts and yada, 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 than actually enjoying the show. That's not what you want out of wrestling. What you want is the wrestlers to be able to take care of themselves, to be able to handle being called names or being heckled by the fans. Yes, fans will go overboard. Absolutely, they will. That's part of the show, though. Part of it is you eliciting some type of reaction from them. If they would have taken the guy's sign and ripped it up, that would have been fine. Them ejecting him, okay, whatever. But there's people out there who want to take him a permanent ban from all shows ever. It's kind of like, well, when you have the mob on your side, the mob doesn't know when to say when, you know. That's how we used to get lynchings. The mob doesn't know quite when to stop. You know, there's always somebody willing to take it to the next level. And if you're mad enough, you'll get them to push it to that level. But most people look at the sign, either laughed and said it was inappropriate, even though, because that's really what comedy is. Comedy is supposed to be inappropriate. You know, we can go into that whole spiel too, but this video will probably be entirely too long. But comedy is supposed to be inappropriate. It's supposed to upset you too. It's supposed to get a reaction out of people. But if all we can do in wrestling now is stand in front of the people and talk about how their sports teams suck, because we can't say anything about, because you call somebody a moron or an idiot, somebody can say those are those people are neurodivergent. You can't say that about them. Then look, we ain't got nothing. Okay, you're gonna have to start making stuff up. Again, you're gonna have to go start calling people poo-poo heads. You know, what else is there to do? You can't call somebody a dumbass, because either somebody's going to be upset or somebody's going to say you're cursing. Well, then now we're limited. We're down to what? You know, the WCW, what happened to them, as we've discussed several times on this channel, is what happened to Standards and Practices occurred. You know, Standards and Practices was the shadow government of time of Turner Entertainment. They were the content police. That's what got to WCW. Well, what got to the WWF was the parents' councils, the Republican-led parents' councils, by the way, who were policing what was on SmackDown, especially SmackDown, because SmackDown was on network television, and what was on Raw, and constantly berating them and going over the top with it. That's what got to them. This is how we got wrestling to be as PG as it is today. And then these same people, by the way, who are complaining that, you know, Nyla Rose is being harassed. Well, you know, WWF used to want people to get a rise out of the fans. They would put Lita in a position where she would be called a whore. They used to do it in ECW all the time. Francine would be called a whore. She would call a slut. And she would say today, oh, it was bad. But nobody ever attacked her. Nobody ever did anything to Francine or any of the women. Dawn Marie, none of them. You know, most of them had pretty good rapport with the fans. Everybody knew it was part of the show. You call him the character a whore. It is what it is. Lita she dealt with it. I know that she probably is, you know, regret. And she's like, oh, they put me in a position to be called a whore. It's like, well, they don't know you, sweetheart. They don't know who you are. They're just calling, they only know what they know. And they're calling you a whore based off of what they know. It's okay. It's part of the character. It works. It works for television. People hate you. You elicit a reaction. That's the point. Other people can get over by beating you up. That's the point. But what you're going to end up having, to get back on track, is the SJW crowd is going to end up really neutering AEW. Because eventually, it's going to get to a point where you can't say anything about anybody. Right? Because they are bending and twisting at the whims of the mob. Because that's all they got. WWE they have this ever-changing list of things that they can't say. It's a corporate entity. There's always going to be, and then sponsorships and all, everybody's going to have their own thing. Like you can't call a guy a retard on WWE television. They do too much stuff with the Special Olympics and all that kind of stuff. You're not going to get away with it. But the reason the AEW was able to gain ground on them, especially being TV 14, is because they know WWE is hampered by all of these entanglements with sponsors and with parents groups and with children's organizations and Be a Star and all that stuff. So they're very limited in what they can do. They can't really even call anybody fat on television, right? They avoid that kind of stuff if they can. AEW can go out there and do whatever they want. For the most part, it's a small fledgling company. The corporations that fund it are giving them some leeway, letting them do their thing, even with the blood and the guts and some of the other stuff that they've been doing. But they don't push it that often. I will say that. They don't push it that often. But they definitely have a wider berth than WWE does. That's their benefit, So it behooves them to have fans that are very engaged. It behooves them to have characters that the fans can engage with, even on this level, this supposedly toxic level. Because where else are they going to be able to do this? They can't do it at a Raw or a SmackDown. There's too many children in the audience. There's too many corporate sponsors. It's too corporate. The wrestlers are scripted. They can't say whatever they want to say. They go to AEW, you can say whatever you want. But if you listen to reaction, and then people are going to complain about the reaction, then what the hell is the point? Then what really is the point? We're left with is vague WWE references and references to pop culture like sports and Star Wars and shit like that. When I started this channel, and this is why I'm glad I started with my own stuff first, is I started this channel truly believing that it wouldn't be around that long. I figured I was going to say something eventually and get booted off Twitter. Because I got kicked off Facebook. I got kicked off Facebook almost 5 years ago. I've been suspended several times on Twitter. YouTube was like the last vestiges of things that I could actually go on and say anything. And look, I was never Sargon of Akkad or anything like that. I didn't have a bunch of people behind me trying to get me back on Facebook or whatever. Once I got booted off, man, nobody cared. Once I got suspended from Twitter a bunch of times, nobody cared. So when you're looking at, what I do here, understand I'm not tiptoeing around things. I still say what I think. I just find better ways to put it. Yelling and screaming at these people, because I already know the mob will shut you up permanently. I would rather say what I got to say and putting it in a different terms than saying it the way I want to say it and then not being able to say anything else at all. That's the milquetoast fence sitter tin pool argument, right? It's, I have to do this in order to stay on YouTube. Okay. But wrestling is what it is. It's lowbrow entertainment. It's blue collar entertainment. It is not for WWE's making a mistake in trying to appeal to everybody all over the world, when everybody all over the world is going to have a different concept of what's offensive and what's not. When you go to Saudi Arabia and their cancel culture says that the women can't show any skin, Americans start talking about how terrible it is. Well, guess what? Your universities are damn near the same way. Where, hey, the male gaze. I mean, how about that? That concept still exists in Saudi Arabia. That's why they want women to cover up. Not because they want to control the women. Forcing the women to cover up is about controlling men. I know Muslims. Detroit has a very high population of Muslims. I know this. Right? They believe that men cannot control their lust. So a woman must cover up to control the lust of men. And if she doesn't cover up, then she's asking for it, essentially. So when you go over to other countries and you can't do, certain signs, I think it's which way the peace sign goes in England. You can't do it. Everybody can do the peace sign as much as they want. Either way they want to do it in the United States. Can't do it over in England. It's offensive. That's what happens when you start appeasing these groups. But you have to at the same time. You're asking people for money. And you're going to do what they want you to do in order to get money. So AEW is in a weird position where they could destroy their own advantage by essentially making their own product unwatchable because why stop with Nyla Rose? Why stop with Anthony Bowens? Why not go after anybody who has something negative to say? To that point, they have a very prominent Jewish wrestler, for instance, right? This Jewish wrestler has said some negative things about, let's say, Christmas. What if somebody was to say something about Hanukkah? It's like, well, what are you gonna do? You're gonna punish the audience for saying stuff back to this Jewish wrestler who says negative things about Christianity and Christmas? I mean, what are you gonna do? Most of the country is still Christian, and then as we become more Hispanic, in terms of immigration, 70% of Mexico is Catholic. So what are you going to do? You're going to tell your Jewish wrestler he can't make Christian jokes? Or are you going to tell your mostly Christian audience they can't make Jewish jokes? Because if that's going to be the case, they're going to be like, well, to hell with this. Now, to their credit, they have not made being Jewish a part of this character's character yet. They haven't said anything about it yet. But most everybody who knows the character knows that the character is Jewish. Now, but that's just one of the many things. You want to have prominent black wrestlers I'm black and I fail to understand what's supposed to offend black people. It's always changing. Apparently, I was supposed to be offended by Crime Time, even though it was the idea of the people who did it. I'm supposed to be offended by somebody being called a thug. It's like that's another word for tough guy. Nobody cares. But when you deal in bending the knee and you deal in this sort of nonsense, you're asking for it. So Cornette is not wrong. If you keep creating new rules for the audience to follow, and those rules are going to be ever expanding as there are going to be more people that's going to be involved in the show. You can't make jokes about X, Y, and Z. Well, then we can't make jokes about anything. We're just supposed to say boo and yay. Heaven forbid somebody says something nobody wants to hear. And I don't know. I think that people are too thin-skinned. I absolutely do believe that. It's been a while since I've been legitimately offended by something somebody said about race. And it takes a while for me to get there. I've read a lot of books. I've watched a lot of TV shows. I've done a lot. I've been in some really tough situations. I typically have thick skin when it comes to that subject. But I wasn't coddled as a kid either. And some of these people were. Some of these people work in industries where they can't say whatever they want. They grew up with always a parent or a teacher or somebody standing over their shoulder and they tattletale and that kind of stuff. And this is kind of culture of cuddling that they want. And I'm not just, bashing AEW fans, because even I would say that the poster was inappropriate. Even I would say that. But I will tell people all the time, it's not bigotry. And then people will take it to the next level and say, oh, it's going to lead to transphobic attacks. It's like, who was going to do that? How do you know? It's that logic leap where it's like, well, how about calling a guy a moron? How does that not lead to anti-neurodivergent individuals being attacked? Because they got bullied a lot when I was a kid. Try being slow in the hood. You get bullied a lot. You get beat up. Just like if you were gay. Yeah, I saw plenty of gay dudes get beat up. Sure. I saw plenty of fat dudes get beat up too. I saw plenty of dudes who were slow, mentally handicapped, get pushed around and beat up. It is what it is. If you live in a society of, I don't want to say bullies, but you live in a society where people take on or attack people who are different. It doesn't matter how different you are. And that's really the what we're talking about here. Nyla Rose is different. Everybody is different. Jews are different. Black people, different. Women, different. Everybody's different. But the reverse is true as well. Try being the only guy in a classroom full of women. I've been there too. I've been one of 4 guys in classrooms full of women. And you have to sit here and listen to how terrible men are. I've been, in those situations. It ain't all about my power dynamics, because they change from venue to venue. One day, there may be a situation where Nyla Rose is in the majority. And I'm not saying it's going to be a wrestling audience. It might just be anywhere. And Nyla Rose feels comfortable saying some stuff that person shouldn't be saying. And nobody's going to react this way. And that's part of the problem. It's like what I said about CM Punk in that shirt. You're going to have a situation where it's not always going to go one way. Sometimes it goes the other way too. And I know a lot of people have been talking about Nyla Rose making fun of this handicapped person. Handicapped people are different. And that was swept under the rug. That was kept very quiet and only really brought up because of this whole thing with this sign. It is what it is. That's the essence of life, man. You're definitely going to, if you get into enough of a tiff with somebody, you're going to go there, man. You're going to call a woman a bitch. You may call a dude who's, wearing a shower cap and wearing pajamas outside in the middle of the day. You might call him an FAG, especially if he's switching and wearing lip gloss. It's going to be the first thing that comes to your mind. It's going to be like if you see a fat dude and you call him fat. It's going to be the first thing that comes to your mind. It ain't got nothing to do with, oh, you hate the gays. It's like, no, it's an observation. Just like if a chick is wearing weave, you call her a weave-headed heifer or something like that. It's just the natural. It's the first thing you go to because it's what you see. It's going to be reality. And wrestling is one of the things where they actually try to monetize that. They want to make you mad so that you can yell at them and yell stuff at them and then be paid to, you pay them to yell at them. That's the odd thing. Wrestling audience is there to pay to yell stuff at you that sometimes you don't even hear. And sometimes they gonna hold up offensive signs that you won't even see. And that's just kind of how it is. But that's the world we live in. All right, I've talked long enough. I've gone completely off the subject and rounding back again. Jim Cornette, of course, got accosted by Raby Hardy, who called him a boomer. He then responded to her, "You've got to run your fucking pie hole about everything, regardless of whether it involves you or not. Huh, toots." You better duck. The planet circling your head may ding you, Miss Center of the Universe. Also, Boomer, let Matt help you with your material. It's the shits. So, he's still doing back and forth with Rebby. It's all fun and games until people get upset and folks get in their feelings. But you gotta learn to check your feelings, man. There's too many outlets for people to try to ruin the lives of others. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of people trying to find out who that guy is that held up that sign, trying to find out where he works, calling his parents or whatever, because that's just the culture we live in now. But they're going to end up destroying AEW, you know? And it is what it is. You're not going to be able to have proper heels. If we was going to cancel people for being offensive, we wouldn't even have pro wrestling. Just the very nature of having Germans and Russians, you know, or Japanese guys at a certain point in time in the same building as Americans was offensive. It upset people. It almost caused riots. Hell, in some cases, it did cause riots. If offending people is not the goal of pro wrestling, then where the fuck is the money? Where's the money? In the flips and that kind of, no, that ain't where the money is. The money is in getting people so riled up they will pay to see you get beat up. So that means sometimes you have to push the boundaries. Now, you know, this is why, and to take it back to Jim Cornette, probably for my final point, is when Jim Cornette first saw that Nyla Rose was the women's champion, he proposed that they play up that Nyla Rose is trans. For starters, it's natural. Secondly, it will get heat. But that's not the kind of heat that you want, says AEW wrestling fan. Well, guess what? In the real world, when trans women go out there and beat girls in swimming or racing or whatever, they get heat. Oh, they're just trying to live their lives. Like, so what? The Iron Sheik was just trying to live his life too. But he was really Iranian. Iran, number one, Haktoo. You know, whatever. So what? If you can't, I know it's a difficult situation because it's a different world. You know, people wouldn't want that today. People wouldn't want the Iron Sheik to come out there and go, Iran, number one, Haktoo. You know, people wouldn't want that. They'd be like, oh my God, they're playing in the xenophobia of the audience in New York. It's like, sure they are. Because that generates money. They want money. Yes, it's cheap heat. Yes. But just so is standing out there and like, the Carolina Panthers, they're so bad. They're so bad that they're going to get the first pick in the NFL draft. They're that bad. Boo. You say the Panthers suck. We're Panthers fans. That's boo. That's boring. That sucks. That's not how wrestling works, man. And then the smarter fans are, the more you have to work in order to get them to get the reaction that you want. But we live in a world now where the wrestlers are being worked by the fans.